Pesach, a little bakkie would come zooming in and stop in front of the shop, and Yankele Borochovitz would come out with big parcels of mozmog's matzah, matzah meal, farfel, and mead. And this was really a happening in Paul, not only for our household, but for many others. And I still in my mind see this bright orange and dark blue Mosmarks packaging. And then came the Seder. Now the Seder in our home was really something else. We were a very small family, and it was just Mom who conducted the Seder, and my older brother Solly and my younger brother Charles. And invited to the Seder was my Uncle Meyer, my late father's brother, and Auntie Minnie. Auntie Minnie had a lovely laugh, and she would giggle throughout the Seder, and it just made us all happy. And now my mom was more intent in raising us as a single mom, and education was the most important. So she was a better businesswoman than she was a cook, but she insisted on preparing for the Seder herself. Now, her knedler was something else. They were not for the faint-hearted. So what I mean by that, you needed a bread knife to cut it. So at the table, obviously you can't bring a bread knife. If you were to attack it with your spoon, you had to be very careful, because it was prone to fly out of your plate at high speed. They were actually like cannonballs, and they could have won any war. But we loved every morsel, especially when you got to the inside. There were fried onions and spices. And, oh, thank you. That's lovely to see that first page. We'll get to that as well. And my mom used to say that filling on the inside is the neshama of the knedel. And so I got some other recipes that other cooks gave about the neshama in the knedel. But my mom was okay with that. She was very tongue-in-cheek. She thought that recipe books were perhaps a bit overrated, everyone talking about the recipes. And she tongue-in-cheek said that her soup mandelach, which is like soup nuts, were dried out to perfection. And I rather like that. And who would advertise that anything that they do is dried out to perfection? But that was Mom. And then when I got married, and we started to go out to more sophisticated, big Seidorim with wonderful cuisine, I suddenly realized when I had my first bowl of soup with knedel put in front of me as a young married woman, I'll never forget, and I still use this recipe. It's Auntie Jill's fluffy knedel recipe. The knedel were floating and bouncing on the soup. It was a revelation for me. And when you cut it, it would just gently open up. And when you ate it, it would melt in your mouth. Well, I felt that I'd made a huge discovery. And it was absolutely, the penny dropped. I had to find out from Jill exactly how did you do this. And that triggered off that original knedel that you had to cut with a bread knife to the beautiful fluffy knedel. A little light bulb flashed in my head. And whenever I went, I would say, can I please have your recipe? I became a bit of a pain and a nuisance, because whenever I was asked out, I wanted to know, how did you do that? And so I started to collect recipe books, recipes, and they just came and came. But Pesach was really what triggered it and what the recipes were always about. And what more can I tell you about that?
No, that's great. So you mentioned also that there was a little book issued by the Zionist Fed in 1946 for the Jewish housewife during Pesach.
Right. Well, that's actually a little double story. Thanks for reminding me. what this really, you know, all the recipes that I collected, where did I keep them? Well, I kept them, they weren't flip files. I kept them in a shoebox. And every time I had another recipe, I would add to it. And one day there was a recipe that broke the camel's back, and that whole box came falling out from the top of my cupboard, but it fell down kaboom. But one item flew out and onto my feet. And it was a tiny little book, about this size. It was white with a blue stripe. It came from the Zionist Fed of 1946. It was addressed to the Jewish housewife. And my mom had treasured this, and she used to every Pesach take that out. And I thought to myself, this is mom telling me, just get going now with a recipe book. And that triggered my idea for starting with a recipe book. And the idea of also perpetuating our customs, that was my door-by-door moment. And what I must also tell you is, when you open the book, the first thing that you see on top, and it's the only writ in the book, it's taken from Devarim, Deuteronomy, and it's Deuteronomy 16, chapter 16, verse 3. And I took this out of that book. I asked the printer to photocopy it and to put it in with our Pesach heritage. And it says, in order that thou remembers the day of thy going forth out of the land of Egypt, all the days of thy life. So that is what Pesach is, that we ourselves feel that we are going through. So I'm not a Rebbitzin, and I'm not going to give you a devar. We'll get back to the book. But I just wanted to mention that that tiny little book had that big impact. It suddenly gave me impetus. Now that was 1989. And my life, it's quite a few changes, but then I had 3 children at high school and middle school. I've always worked, and I've never had time to be on the committees at school. So I went to the PTA and I said, I've got a whole lot of recipes. Can we do a fundraiser for a Pesach recipe book for Herzliya? They were quite excited about it. And they actually said, we will send us a newsletter and we'll send it off to all the parents. So, so I sent, yes, that's the second newsletter. So I sent, thank you, Lauren. So I sent a newsletter to all the parents in the form of a flyer, and I couldn't wait for my children to come home. I had 3 kids at middle, 1 at middle, 2 at high. And when they came home from school, I said, so darlings, weren't you proud of your mom with a flyer handed out? And they said, Mom, we don't want to disappoint you, but those flyers became actual flyers. They made them into paper aeroplanes, and they were flying all over the classroom. So what do you do? So I had a few mothers who actually did hit bullseye to a few, and I got a few recipes from the parents, which was wonderful, because we wanted participation. And then at that point, I thought, gosh, if they don't come to me, I'll go to them. So I phoned Laurie Wiener and I said, would you come on board? I knew that she was a good cook, and she said with pleasure. She was always so professional, came to my home every day for weeks, looking so well groomed, and I pulled my socks up when I saw her every morning. And we got Nina Kabensky, who was brilliant at getting sponsorships. And then I had Roma as well, just to check some of my background. And so that's really how we got off the ground. And then I'd gone to the 2 great giants of retailers who help us over Pesach, Pick n Pay and Checkers. It was originally just Checkers, but I must just tell you that the cost of printing is actually mind-boggling. If you look at so many books today, you see they printed either in Singapore, in China, or somewhere else because of cost of paper, ink, and labor. And then it was no different. And so the very first book you can see on the cover has the logo of Checkers and Pick and Pay. And it was quite interesting because Checkers started off, and it was very difficult to approach them to also bring in Pick and Pay. I mean, these two are competitors, and they don't sit kindly on, next to each other. So I don't want to go into that, but that is a story in itself. I will just say that Mr. Ackerman, normally when you ask for something like this, you've got to show them a mock-up. And I'll just tell you very quickly, those are the blue books. That's 1989 that you're looking at on the screen, and 1990. 1990 was only by Pick and Pay, and they had the Pick and Pay logo on the back. And when I went into Mr. Ackerman, I had nothing to tell him other than that was in my head. And it was amazing. After telling him what I was going to do and what was in my head, he just looked at me and he said, "How much do you want, my dear?" And he gave me what I asked for. I'll never forget that. So when, we'll get to my Burgundy story, but when I got to that, the first copy I sent to Mr. Raymond and to Wendy Ackerman, just to say how much I remembered his generosity without having any idea of what I was going to present at the end of the day. Just to tell him I now have a little home industry and I want him to be the first recipient of that book. That was just by the by, Lauren. We hadn't spoken about that before. But,
No.
But you can see the second book with a band. Now the band it just signifies, it says from 1940 to 1990. It was the golden anniversary of Herzliya. And Philip Kravitz at the time had this idea that maybe we should have the first edition. There were 2,000 books and they just sold like hotcakes. The second edition, the 2,000 books, sold like hotcakes. And again, with a sponsorship of mainly Pick and Pay for the second one. And if you look inside these books, they are full of advertisements, full of advertisements, because without those advertisements, we wouldn't have had a book. So what else would you like to know, Lauren?
No, so just speaking about the actual book, there's so much that goes into writing, publishing, editing a book. Can you tell us a little bit, how do you edit a recipe book? Because in an ordinary book, you've got your English grammarian, etc. But for here, you needed an editor for things culinary. You needed an editor for things kosher. And then on top of it all, you needed an editor for things to make sure it was kosher for Pesach. Right. So how did you do all of that?
Good question. Well, if you come from the Plaas, and no one knows what a Plaas is, it's a farm like me, we spoke Yiddish and Afrikaans at home, which wasn't uncommon for country community Jewish families. And so when it came to the English of the book, my English fortunately has improved a bit. I needed someone who would be an English proofreader, and my friend Rochelle Ginsburg was excellent at that. She picks up very quickly. And so that I wouldn't get, because if your language, the big giveaway is normally your syntax and your prepositions. And Ben still pulls my leg. He said, you say things like, throw you with a stone. He said, I can see you flying through the air with a stone. You must say, I throw a stone at somebody. Don't say that. And many other mistakes that I made language-wise. So here I felt safe. I was being checked out. And then as far as now the culinary side, that was looked after language by Laurie, but I had a wonderful lady called Jocelyn Angel, who was the caterer at the time at Claremont Wynberg Shaw. Then it was only Claremont Shaw. And she tested the recipes for me, and she had to obviously read them to test. And now what the English reader reads will not pick up anything with the cooking side. So Jocelyn said, you know, you've got a lovely lemon biscuits recipe here for Pesach, but where's the lemon? You forgot the lemon, which I had in fact. So you needed someone who knew how to cook to notice something like that. And then being not only a Jewish cookbook, but a Pesach one, Roma Schneider read it for me. And when it came to Jane Raffaele's whiskey cake, she said, whiskey? We don't have whiskey over Pesach. So it became the muscadel cake. So when you see Jane Raffaele, and I of course checked it with Jane first, and I said, Jane, do you mind if we change from whiskey? So she said, if it works, be my guest. So that's what happened with, and that's why you actually, with a kosher Pesach recipe book, you've got to pull in helpers who can help you. In my case, with my English, and that the recipes, that all the ingredients that should be there are there. And we didn't want anyone to say they don't give all the ingredients, which that often gets whispered, and so on. So, and of course, to have Roma save the day by not having us have a big mistake here with the whiskey.
The whiskey cake.
Right, right. Yeah.
So, speaking about that and traditions and things like that, you mentioned to me as well that you've read up and you took it upon yourself to read a lot of the early Jewish and kosher cookery books. And there was a fascinating story that you told me about Montefiore's wife. And I'm not going to spoil it any further. If you could, if you could tell us that story.
Yeah, I will. But just before I do, you know what preempted my book? Every Pesach, I had this tiny, flimsy little B'nai B'rith little bookie, which really is like, oh, when I look at it, this is splashed with Knadel and everything. And my mom and my mom-in-law used to use this little book. And yeah, you did show it earlier. And but this is also incorporated in my Pesach book. There you go. There you go. So the B'nai B'rith book started me off with things that we have to have at Pesach, like the charoset that we only have at Pesach, and so many other things that really go back into tradition. Now, getting back to Montefiore. So this is the Montefiore's. This, of course, is not the original book. It was printed in 1846, and it was the first English cookery book. And when I started with when the book became mine, when I really personalized the book, a bit down the line that we may touch on, my brother Charles bought me this book, and it's fascinating. And Chaim Raphael, who wrote the preface, had something so interesting to say. First of all, who was the lady? It says edited by a lady. Who was this lady? Well, the lady was Judith Montefiore, and she was the wife of Lord Moses Montefiore, who was knighted by Queen Victoria in 1947. And they were great philanthropists, and they worked not only for the locals, but for Jews everywhere in the world, for impoverished communities worldwide. And they were an incredible team. And it was proved to be Lady Judith who wrote this book. And so in his preface, as I said, Chaim Raphael gives us an insight. He said they were religious Jews, and they wanted to observe the laws of kashrut. So how did they go and hunt? Because they were part of the hoi polloi. They wanted to hunt like all the British aristocracy. And so guess what they did? They went hunting for pheasant. They would, in fact, travel with their shochet. So if you can imagine Lord Jacobowitz, not Jacobowitz, sorry, I'm going away to Jacobowitz now. If you could just imagine how Montefiore was on horseback next to his shochet, and when he got to the pheasant or whatever they were hunting, the shochet would have to take over and do the killing. But another interesting thing, that sounds terrible actually to say the killing, but the shochet had to do his job. And in the book, she also gives a lovely matzah cake recipe. It's called a matzah pound cake, but I wouldn't try it because you have to have at least 2 bags of prunes for 2 weeks if you were to have that cake. So that's really, but one thing that I took from the book is that Judith Montefiore was Ashkenazi, the daughter of Levi Bar and Cohen, and Montefiore, as you know, was Sephardi. So her book had the blending of both cuisines. And I thought to myself, you know what? I can learn from this lady. So in our Pesach book, we've got although we are mainly an Ashkenazi community from Lithuania or other Baltic state, we've got a beautiful Sephardi community here. And I phoned a few of my friends to give me their recipes. But I was just cautious. I thought with kitniot and with the majority avoiding kitniot, I asked them for recipes without kitniot. So that's really my little story as far as that's concerned. I also, when I collected books, I had a wonderful book that you all probably have. It's called The International Goodwill Book. And it was a lovely cartoon by Dorf Fiedler on the cover. And I loved the way of the layout of the recipe. It was easy to read, easy to follow. And I also liked the way they had different sections. They had a celebrity section, they had a newlywed section, and which I only put in my own books. That was not in the blue book, that's in the books that followed. So that's really what I can touch on there, Lauren.
And Esther, speaking about the layout of the book, we all know what a wonderful, gifted, talented artist you are. And I know you shake your head, but it's true, you are. And how did your talents as a gifted artist come into play in the book in terms of illustrating, styling, color presentation, all of that?
Thank you for asking and thank you for your compliments. Well, it actually, my art in here are little sketches, you know. I had this lovely silver soup tureen that my mom had given me with a beautiful silver ladle. And I thought, well, knedels would look lovely floating in this now that I know how to make them float. And so I actually made a little sketch of a soup tureen and the knedler. And so throughout the book, I've got little sketches. But what I really wanted to put in was images. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Can you? I don't know if you can see me.
Yeah, we can.
Can you? Because I've lost you somehow. Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, good. I'm back. I always sort of panic when suddenly the screen goes black and I think, but no. So, so I made these little sketches, but it also, I had a wonderful collection of art and Jewish art. And that's why, that's one of my pieces. That's actually that's a soup tureen. The previous one was my mom's wine decanter that we had in Paul, and which I love using at Pesach. This beautiful crystal, and we have to drink 4 cups of wine, and it's lovely for me that I pour it from my mom's decanter. And but there were sketches. There was Alphonse Levy, a 19th century artist who had this wobbler making knedlich, and I thought, hey, that's got to be in front of the book. And then there was that. There she is. Thank you, Lauren. And then there was an artist who made wonderful etchings called Bernard Picard, and he had wonderful etchings of Pesach, which I've got in the book. And throughout the book, they are from the Sefer Hamingim, Amin Khadim. There are wonderful woodcuts that I simply, here's one that I could perhaps show you. And these woodcuts are so beautiful. They're from 1695. So we also have a bit of the Jewish artist that over here. And yes, and then when it came to styling, we had a wonderful photographer who gave us of his talent. And his name is Gerald Jacobson. And he took the photographs of our dishes. And it was great to be able to cook for this and to style it. And a friend of mine, Reva Katz, took me through to the photographer studio. Laurie was there with her, which she made some beautiful, that is lovely. Now, if you look at that for a minute, the linen there came from Linen and Glass in Constantia. The Wassingbecher in the distance and the beautiful silver candles came from Winkenstadt. And they also gave us Haggadot to use and to put on the table. That book on the table is actually called A Feast of History that I got from friends in Canada that has a Haggadah on the one side. And the Seder plate is an heirloom in the family. And when Gerald put the Seder plate down, he said, climb on the ladder, look down, and see if your aerial view is what you want. So this is on the cover of the book, as you can see. And at the bottom, there's like a dark bit, and people say, wow, you've managed to get that shadow just right. That's not just a shadow, that's the top of my head looking down from the ladder. So I'm actually right there, like Alfred Hitchcock used to be in all his movies by being a janitor or something. So this is my little fingerprint, And yes, so there you are. And, you know, in my later editions, I've also incorporated a few other pictures that may come up, like Ina Parman, who everyone in the book is Jewish except for two cooks. Ina Parman, I just felt I was so grateful to her, because often when I shop, she has given the Jewish housewife so many products that carry the Hechsher. And so I asked her, could she give me a recipe? And she gave me a wonderful blackened fish recipe. I said, as long as it's got no sort of bread products in it, which she understood. And so I've got this lovely one, which was taken, this lovely recipe. It was such a delicious fish recipe that she gave me. And the photographer, Franz Lauringer, gave me permission to actually use this image. So yeah, what else can I tell you, Lauren?
So speaking about your different books, Esther, can you tell us in chronological order the publications of the different editions of your recipe book and how come they came about?
Certainly. So we have, as we've touched on, the first copy, and this was a wonderful, successful fundraiser for Herzliya. And I've got wonderful press cuttings as well. And what was very exciting is that the Cape Times and the Argus came to our home, and I had to lay the Seder table. My kids had to get their school uniforms off and put on their paste-up attire. And they came to also record this exciting event as a Herzliya fundraiser. So this was number one. And the second one, and this has also just 160 pages. The second one is exactly the same. This is the one which was the Jubilee edition, and this was 1990. And then, you know, time went on. I should have like an hourglass at this point with the sands going through. And then time went on, and then it was 1999. And my life was so different then. This was the first of I called it the expanded edition. And from 160, it went to 228 pages. So what happened here? Well, first of all, I had a Lart Lameki, who was then 8. I was almost 50, and this was an exciting thing. So young, and I realized that to have children over Pesach was a completely different ball game and needed a different strategy. So that was when this book became personalized. But before it all came about, I actually went back to the school and I said, hey, I've got another idea for you. But it was bad timing for them. They had big building projects going at the time with big fundraising schemes. And this really was more of a Nochschlepper scheme. So I thought, oh, well, it's not going to happen. I thought I'd involve maybe the girls I'd worked with before, but life goes on and everyone has other responsibilities and other things they're involved with. So I was sharing this information with my brother Charles, who got me this book. And I just said, oh, Charles, really, I'm now going to shelve it. And he said, no, I've got faith in you. How much does the printer want? I said, I'll find out. And he said, I'm going to invest in you. And I said, I'll pay you back. As it happened, it was a very costly exercise at the time. And I was able, with the sale of these books, to pay Charles back. But what's in this book and what made it different? Well, when I shared it with my children, my oldest son, Mark, had then qualified as a dietitian. And he looked at the book and he said, Ma, you can leave the salads, but for heaven's sake, this book is so rich. So I said, if you're so clever, I'll give you the health section. So we have in this book a health section. And then my daughter is newly married. And she said, it's like reading a novel every recipe. She said, I'm a working girl. She's also a social worker like you, Diana. So I thought I must get something quick and easy. So I said, Adina, you get me some quick and easy recipes. And right, I'm going to have a newlywed section. Then my middle son, David, was at Stellenbosch University at residence, and over Pesach, he needed to get a good pass mark. So I gave him a good pass over mark by actually having a section, it's only one page, the lunchbox. What do you pack to someone who's from a frum home and it has to have a pekala over Pesach? So there you go with the lunchbox. And then back to Samuel, who was in 1999. I can't believe he was 30 a week ago. And he was then 9 years old. And there was a wonderful Riverson. I don't know if you remember her. And she actually said to me, Lazarus, Riverson Lazarus.
Yona.
And Yona actually said to me, you know what? It's very difficult with children. I suggest you cover your kitchen, and I wrote down everything she said. You cover your kitchen a bit before the time. You have a little cordon of area, even if it's on a balcony or a porch or a stoop. And then what's so important, she said, when it's cut-off time, and you can not have any more matzah, but any more chometz, and you aren't allowed matzah yet, that's when the children say they're hungry. What do you do? And then she gave me an idea of having little packets, like you have party packets, have little packets and put in like a little nasharai. Could be a piece of chocolate, could be some chips. Put together a little bit of a nash and don't just give it to them. Be ceremonious. Put it in this, decorate your little packet, have a blanket somewhere where they can picnic with it and they'll be out of your hair. And that was how she solved it. And also doing for party time, my children's section. I've got a friend whose birthdays, whose children's birthdays are during Pesach. She said she loves the book because of that. All the ideas to have a children's party during Pesach. And going back to the newlywed section, that is still my favorite section in the book. And I must say, there are lots of cooks who they work such long hours, these young newlyweds, and you've got to go to a deli sometimes to buy. So I've actually said, when all else fails, you don't go to plan B, you go to plan D, to the deli plan. But you've got beautiful dishes when you were married. So use those dishes to put in the chopped herring that you bought. Decorate it beautifully. You can even get beautiful flowers to put on. But remember, don't go and over decorate now, because people still want to recognize what you put in front of them. Also, how to conduct a Seder, how to have elbow room. And if there's someone perhaps who doesn't, who's that, won't you have something of too much salt, cholesterol, how you ask your new guests in the beginning what they have and what they don't. And when you do serve it, don't make a big fuss about it. Just give it to them very unobtrusively. So even those little things that I had to learn through experience, I could tell the young newlywed. We even start telling them how to boil an egg, which I thought was important because I didn't quite know how to boil an egg. And there are 4 ways to boil an egg, So I put that in. And what I found was so useful, during Pesach, the potato fills the tummy. So I contacted the potato board and I just said, please help me. And they sent me the most beautiful photos, the best way to make mash, the best chips, how to make wedges with different dips. So it became a wonderful book for me. So now I wanted to say that the green book, which is my new book, is like the one that you see on the screen now. What I had the ability to do here was there were a few tweaks that I needed. Here and there, someone pointed out, did you see that you wrote this is a dairy recipe? It's actually not dairy, So I was able to change the D to a P if it was Pareve or whatever. So this book gave me an opportunity to do a bit of a cleanup. And but as I wrote in the introduction of this book, which I just feel I have to say, that 30 Seidorim have passed, the first publication of Passover recipe and guidebook since 1989. And although much has evolved and been touched by time, this book has remained true to its original concept. And as I said to you right at the beginning, this is what people really wanted. And then since its inception, the warmth, the love, and the memories which permeate the recipes have undoubtedly attributed to the success of the book. And then I've got here, I'll skip a little bit, and then the original stalwarts, Laurie Wiener, Nina Kavinsky, Roma Schneider, will always remain the cornerstones of this book. And then I've got my children who shaped the Burgundy edition. And then I acknowledge the late Desmond Mazels, who I would really phone every few minutes. And Kelly at the Beth Din also, if I wasn't sure about anything, I didn't want to confuse the housewife, so I would check. And so this book gave me a chance just to reiterate my acknowledgements to all those people on whose shoulders I climbed to present this book. So what have I left out and what
Esther,
else?
you mentioned something to me as well about Rebbitzin Arlita Lerner and the date.
Yes.
I seem to remember you telling me she told you to have a menu for a day-by-day basis for the whole of Pesach.
Exactly. We had Rabbi and Arlita Lerner at Claremont Shul, and she was very excited when I told her about the book. And she said she would give me some of her Pesach ideas, and out came this huge Pesach box. And inside was a most wonderful book. And she said, this is what I'm talking about. People sometimes say, Pesach's so difficult, I don't know what to do. So she gave me this idea to have, first of all, I have in the book, I have like the Seder menu. I've got Seder, first night Seder, second night Seder. Then some people who don't eat meat, I've got a vegetarian and a fish Seder. And then I've got the day-to-day ideas. And that has been a savior for so many people. And I enjoyed putting that together. And then, because I've always, my children were still all at home, and it was important that I changed the menu a little bit, and that I was able to offer something every day. And this just gives an idea to the families.
Yeah.
And
What are your
what else would
favorite?
you?
What are your favorite recipes?
Okay, can you hear me? Because the
Yeah.
sound.
Yes, yes. You froze for a little bit, but you're fine now.
Okay. Oh, that's good. You're back. Okay, so I'm going to talk quickly because it says internet connection unstable. Favorite one is really Pesach, and you can only have it Pesach. It's so simple and it's very comforting, and you feel that you're free and you can wallow in your comfort. And that is the matzo meal porridge. And it's so easy. You need a cup of milk, half a cup of water, and you heat it up. You put in 4 tablespoons of matzo meal, a pinch of salt, a little dash of cinnamon, a bit of sugar if you want. I put a teaspoon in. Sugar, you can leave it out. It's lovely as it is, or you can sort of zhuzh it up by putting in sliced bananas, sliced strawberries, some kiwi, a bit of honey and a bit of milk. It is lovely. But one of the Rebbitzins gave me a big tip, and this is particularly relevant when making the porridge recipe, and that's Esther Mazel's. Esther said when a cook cooks, she cooks and she cooks, and she stands in front of the stove. So don't you move away from the stove when you cook. Now, especially with this, you've got to stand there and stir. If you go away and take a fall, it's going to solidify, and it'll take you 3 days to actually clean that pot because it would really be solid at the bottom, and you don't want to do that. It's enough work already. And yeah, so that was that.
Would you say, after all of this, would you say, are you a good cook?
Well, actually, I've got a big answer for you. It's a small word, no. But you know something? It actually takes someone who's not a good cook to compile a recipe book, because good cooks, they just skip certain steps. If you're like me, what I ultimately put in front of you is going to be delicious and it's going to be perfect. But I'm a cook who needs to be told you need 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and you need to have 1 3/4 cup of this. And I know what a good cook is. My mom-in-law was a good cook. My daughter is a good cook. By saying good, it means it's like an artist. Not everyone can draw. It's a certain aptitude. And don't underestimate a chef. It's not only the love and the passion, it's something else. It is an absolute talent to be able to do that. And I wanted to aspire to that, but I've always known that no, I'm not that natural cook. But yes, I needed to be the one to compile this book, because I could put, not that I have to tell someone they've got to break an egg when they put it in the sponge cake, they're not going to put a whole egg in. But you know what? There are so many steps that often is taken for granted when you're a good cook. You say, why don't you do that? In Afrikaans, they would say vanzelfsprekend, but you know, it has to be, yeah. So yes.
So to end off, and you started off, and in fact, the whole, all 4 of your books, the theme that seems to run through them is something that you often say, which is le dor vador, that you want this to be not just a recipe book, but an intergenerational conversation with the essence of not only Pesach in particular, but with our Yiddishkeit in general. And just to end off, because I can see we're getting close to the end of an hour, you told me a story about going into a bookshop in Singapore. And I remember you telling me how that transcended time and generations. And maybe if we can just end off with that story.
Yes, I would love to. I'm not going to tell the whole story because it was a funny, fascinating story how we landed up for a long weekend in Singapore. But just to read this, I've moved it to my half title page now in the new book, and I'm going to just read it. The Passover Seder, the reading of the Haggadah, and the celebratory meal transcends time and links generations. And that I found was so profound. And I would never have actually found this. But in this bookshop, which was our last afternoon before going to the airport, Ben said, look, there's a bookshop. It was called Borders. He wafted in, and I went in after him. He disappeared. It was a bookshop like you've never seen, with easy chairs. And it was like being in someone's lounge. So I went to the art section, of course, and I looked at the art history. Then I did that, and then I went to the cooking section. And then I decided Ben was still busy. I'll tidy up the bookshop. There was no one there working. So when all the books were all over the place, I stood there tidying up. And one book kept on popping out. And I would put it back. I'd walk past, that book would come out. I picked up that book, and I thought, this book is telling me something. As I opened it, it was a Jewish cookbook, and there was an anonymous quote. And this, what I just read, this is what it said. And I made a note of it, and I thought, for my next book, these words and this quote just has to be in it, because it resonates what all our Chagim are about, but in particular, what Pesach is about, especially for.
Absolutely. Thank you, Esther. Thank you so much. Diane, I can see we at 12 o'clock. So just for me to say thank you to you, Esther, and then I'll leave the rest over to you, Diane. I see there are one or two questions in the chat if you want to address those.
Yes, well, thanks to both of you. First of all, Lauren, for the way that you interviewed Esther was really lovely. And Esther, your passion absolutely shines through while you're talking about your book. So thanks for a really wonderful morning. And I must tell you that while you were talking, I've been paging through your book as well, and I'm salivating. So I can't wait to plan my Pesach meals this year. And there are a couple of questions, and the one question in particular was from Colin Goldberg, who wants to know whether you have an e-edition of the book, because he buys a lot of e-books, and he wants to know if your book is available on electronic.
That's a very good question. In fact, my husband Ben he's always on his Kindle. He's always busy ordering e-books. And Ben actually mentioned to me that we should have e-books. So here he is actually right next to me. Okay. Ben just tells me that my son Mark in Melbourne, Australia, he wants to do his version of this, which will incorporate all of this and which will be an e-book. And while I've answered the question there, I will definitely keep you in touch with that, Diana. But if there's anyone at the seniors who's interested in a recipe, just let me know and I'll send it to you to pass on to them. And I also have a copy of my book that I would really love to donate to seniors. And so if somehow to get it to you, maybe if you have a lucky draw of sorts, or I don't know how you'd work it.
So we actually we discussed that this morning at our staff meeting, because you had told me that you were generously going to donate the book, and we thought maybe the fairest way to do it, with the fact that we're all in lockdown now, is just to ask anybody who's online this morning who's got the next birthday, and maybe the person whose birthday is closest to today can be the recipient of your book. So if you have a birthday coming up in the next couple of weeks, put it in the chat line, and then we will see who's closest to today, and that person will be the lucky winner. Are there any questions for Esther? You can unmute yourself and ask her if you want to.
While we wait for a question, I can tell you a few gentlemen also participated in the book. Godfrey Sheb's wine recipe is fantastic, which we actually made when we still lived in Constantia. We made in our garage, and that was quite an experience. I went to get Hermitage grapes with Michelle, and we made the wine in the garage, but we didn't realize that wine, when it ferments, it overflows. And I had this beautiful purple going down my driveway into Freer Avenue, and I was actually called the Shebeen Queen of Freer Avenue. So you know, we just a little aside, and also Lionel Fee gave the most wonderful pickled cucumber recipe. So there's room for gentlemen as well in the book. And if anyone comes to you later, Diana, and who perhaps has a question, if I don't have the answer, I will find out for you. And if it relates to Pesach and cooking, and which is my curiosity and interest as well as my art, that I would love to reply to you. And thank you for making it comfortable for me too, Diana, and especially to you, Lauren. You know a little bit how I am, and so thank you for just making it very comfortable for me this morning.
It's a pleasure. And you know, you said you were so nervous about it, but you came across so beautifully. You have nothing to be nervous about, and may this be the first of many appearances. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So
thank you.
If there are no other questions, I'm just checking. Debbie Epstein is asking, when is the new book available in South Africa?
Yes, the new book is available now. I live in Sea Point, but I can always get it to whoever would be interested. It sells for 80 Rand a copy. And I've specially packaged it in, so it's Hormats free, and with all our sanitation at the moment, that, you know, the book is safe. So if you would like to, perhaps if I should give you my phone number.
I think maybe if anybody's interested, they can contact us, and then I will contact you. Yeah.
Good.
You can do
That's
that.
wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So just three announcements, actually. This afternoon, we have our normal video afternoon at 2 o'clock. I'm still waiting to see if the cantors have arrived, because they haven't. By this morning, I haven't got the link for that, but I will have something for you to watch. And the last couple of weeks have really been beautiful concerts. So please join us this afternoon at 2. You do have the link for that. And then I'm sure you heard me talking to Lauren earlier on. We didn't have a guest speaker for next week, and Lauren has kindly offered to come back next week. And I don't know how many of you were on the other evening to watch the fascinating Achberg. It was the centenary of the Achberg orphans. But even if you did, but if you didn't, you really need to be here next Thursday to watch it at 10 o'clock in the morning. And Lauren will give you an overview of the Achberg orphans. Lauren, if you want to say anything about it now, just to whet their appetite, you're welcome to do so.
Okay. Thanks, Diana. Just to let you know, I'll be showing just because of the time, I'll be showing a 20-minute movie which outlines the whole Isaac Achberg story, and I'll give a little story about it, including my own personal story and that of some other orphans, and then just the general historical background about the conditions in Eastern Europe before these children were saved by Isaac Achberg, a little bit about Isaac Achberg, the man, a little bit about his mission and coming back to South Africa, and the way these orphans, the path that these orphans' lives took once they got back to South Africa. And then we'll show the movie. So it will also be just an hour.
Thank you for that, Lauren. And then just finally, because the end of March is nigh, just to let you know that at the end of March, both Wadia and Malcolm, our driver, are retiring. And obviously we would love to acknowledge them and do something for them because they're retiring. But because we are in lockdown and the centers are still closed, we aren't going to do anything now, but we have told them as soon as we open up, we will have something to really thank them for what they've done and to acknowledge them for what they've meant to so many of us. So just to let you know, and also that Malcolm will be driving in Sea Point once he's retired. He will not be driving the combi, but he is going to be available to lift anybody in his car. So you're welcome to contact him privately if you need lifts after the end of March. Otherwise, that's all for now. Lauren, if you've got 2 seconds to just stay online afterwards, I've got a Zoom question that I need to ask you. But otherwise, for the rest of you, thank you all for attending this morning. It was fascinating. And I hope that you are all going to prepare for Pesach now after listening to the book. And just to let you know that next week, in fact, I think it's going out today, the Pesach orders are going to be in for next week for Berkey's. You can order both your Shabbat meal and your Pesach meal and send it in as soon as possible so that we can provide you with a great Pesach Seder meal next weekend if you want it. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for being with us, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
So, Lauren, can I just ask you,
Yeah.
when we are going online and trying to share screen, so for example, I've been doing these concerts on a Thursday afternoon. When I call up the share screen and I get it going, it's perfect, but I then can't see the audience. So I'm looking at the shared screen only, and I can't gauge what's going on.
Okay, so everybody who's still on, can you just stay on? You can turn your cameras off. I just need a device on, and it works better with more than 5 people. So if Ruth and Hillary and Shelley, Sylvia, David, who else is on?
Just stay on and don't go off.
Just stay on. Whoever else, just if you can, just stay on. Go and make a cup of tea and coffee. Ignore us. I just need your devices on. Okay.